This has an O-ring right here. Looking at it, it's not the best, but it doesn't look bad. I don't think I'm going to need to worry too much about that. I can actually see light through that small orifice in there, so that's a good sign. But I will go ahead and try and squirt some carburetor cleaner down through there. And I've learned the hard way to wear safety glasses when you do this, because some always comes back. What I'm looking for is just carburetor fluid to come through the other side. If you find one of these that's completely plugged, they have tools that have little, almost like feeler gauges, real thin wires that you can run down through there. But I've also read in places that you shouldn't run any wires down through there because it could change the dynamics of the jet. But I do it anyway. This is just real thin wire that I've got on hand. I'm just making sure that all of these holes are clear. And if you've got a compressor with some compressed air, that's always nice to have as well. Okay, so that looks good. Now in here, there's another jet. That's going to take a really small screwdriver to get him out. And as I look through where the throttle needle comes through in the main jet, that's wide open. So these carburetors are much cleaner than I anticipated. Be careful with this jet. When you put it back in, you don't want to crank it down, but it should be snug. But this is really soft brass, I'm assuming, and these are easy to bugger up. I believe this is called the pilot jet. Okay, that's what she looks like. And these are all stamped with numbers so you can tell what size they are in case you need to get to the point where you're rejetting this. Again, I'm just going to look down through there. That should be clear, but that looks like it might be obstructed. There's definitely something in this one. This hole is so small in here that I couldn't get that wire through, but now that I've kind of got in there and scratched around it a little bit, I can see light through there. So that's clean. That's ready to go back in. Next thing I'm going to do is try and get those floats out of here. There's a little pin that needs to be punched out. Doesn't take much, but I'm just going to set it up here on this wooden block so that it's clear on the bottom and give it a little push. I didn't even tap that with a hammer. Sometimes I have to give it a little tap. That came right out. Keep track of how these things come out, because on this one there is a little stop right here, so that faces down. Remember, you're looking at the bottom here. Now I can get in and remove these needles, and I can pull that as well. Just make sure everything inside of there is clean. Last thing I'm going to remove on this is the choke. Now I would suggest if this is your first carburetor that you've kind of ever torn into, certainly don't be afraid, but each one of these steps I would do individually. So I would, for example, take the choke out, run some carburetor fluid, put cleaner down in there, put the choke back in. Same with down here with the jets, pilot jet, main jet. You'll notice on here there's an O-ring right here. Inspect that. That looks pretty good. So I'm just going to go through each one of these parts that I've removed and clean them up with some carburetor fluid, toothbrush, wire brush, whatever it's going to take. And then I'm going to clean this carburetor body with some carburetor fluid, and it's pretty bad, so I may start out with a little bit of gas just to get the big stuff off. I'm also going to do the same thing with the float bowl. There is one more thing on the float bowl that I want to do, and that is remove this screw. This is a drain screw. I want to pull that out, clean it up, and put it back together. So there's really not much else for this particular carburetor body, and I'm going to repeat this process on all of them. This needle that sits inside the float ball and is activated by your float. Every one of these that I've come across actually has a small spring in there, so put a little shot of carburetor cleaner in there, make sure that that spring is free. Believe it or not, this is the same carburetor after a little cleaning with some gas and some carburetor fluid. So we're at the point now where we can start putting this back together. And it doesn't necessarily matter what order you put some of these things in, so we're just going to start up here with the choke. And each part that has some kind of an O-ring or a rubber gasket, just be sure you check those and make sure that they're still functioning and they're not deteriorated before you put them back together. Because you could end up with gas leaks or vacuum leaks, all kinds of things that might cause headache down the road. Put that in there and just snug it up. Next thing that goes in there is the needle. Like so. Then we're going to put this float assembly on here and follow that with the pin. And we'll just gently slide it in there and get everything lined up. Like so. Then we have our pilot jet that goes down here. Those are some real fine threads, so just be careful when you get that caught. Just make sure that those threads are starting themselves, don't force it. And just when you feel it get there, bottomed out, just give it a little twist and you're done. Then our main jet goes in. This does have a spot for a straight screwdriver, but I don't like the feel of that, so put a wrench on there. It's also got the O-ring on there. I've checked that. That looks good. And just snug. That's pretty much it for the top part. For the bottom, we're just going to replace the screw right there, and this has an O-ring on it as well. And you don't want to go crazy on tightening this down. You're just going to seat it all the way because it's just a drain, and then give it a little twist and make sure it's tight. Okay, now this is pretty much done. What I have decided to do is I'm going to order a gasket kit. If this was just a single carburetor, I would probably just cut this out by hand using some new gasket material, but I've got 4 carburetors, and I need 8 total gaskets, 4 for the tops, 4 for the bottoms. But in the meantime, I'm just going to put this old gasket back in place here and just put everything back together. These are going to be really easy to replace, even if I've got all these carburetors in that carburetor rack. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on here, and that way I can just kind of button everything up. And I'm also going to do the same with the top. Put the old gasket on, put everything kind of back together loosely, and then when my new gaskets get here, we'll just have to take the covers off, put the new gaskets on. They don't take any kind of sealant or any type of paste, so they're really easy to change out. And these are only going to just be snug. I'm not even going to cinch them down. All I'm doing is just trying to keep all of the parts together at this point, and just do one carburetor from start to finish. Okay, so there you have it. That's that. And I think I had mentioned it earlier. This is carburetor 1, and this throttle valve was really sticky, and I think that was initially the problem with this one. But we've cleaned it up. Everything looks good. The only thing you need to do when you put these back together is make sure that that needle is going down into the tube, into the needle jet, or down into the, that's where the main jet sits, on the other side of that. And if it's not quite going down easily, don't wrestle it. Figure out what's going on, because you don't want to bend your jet and have to start over, or your needle. Okay, so there's that. That's moving a lot better than it was when we started. So this, I'm just going to put the cap on. The cap's going to have to come off anyway, because that throttle rod has to go through all of these and get secured with that bolt. Now, one thing that I'm not monkeying with is this top bolt here. You can see it's got some kind of, if I can find the camera here, it's got some kind of a glue or epoxy on here, and they have set the depth of each one of these throttle valves so that all 4 of these carburetors are in sync when you're running this bike. And I'm not going to mess with that. Hopefully I don't have any issues with that. Okay, so there we have it. Carburetor 1 is finished. I'm going to move on to carburetor 2. I'm not going to worry about filming those because they're going to go through the same process as this one did. Now all I have to keep track of are the extra bolts and the plugs. This plug goes in carburetor 1, but we'll keep those in the bin. And then once I get my new gaskets, I'll replace the gasket on the bottom here, snug that up, and that'll be done. The top one, I have to wait until I get the whole assembly back together, because I need to put those bolts through that throttle rod. New gaskets are in, so we can start assembling these carburetors and get them back on the machine. Right now we're just going to put the new gaskets on the bottoms. The top ones we have to wait until we get that throttle bar and the main brace all assembled. One down, 3 to go.